The sand swirled beneath me, curling in thin streams that lifted into the dry air like fingers, scratching at my skin and stinging my eyes. I squinted against the light, feeling the blistering heat pour down on me, as if the sun itself were a furnace made to break a man. I felt the weight of every step in the loose, shifting sand, each footfall sinking in deeply, dragging me backward even as I pushed forward. I trudged, alone, through a desert that stretched endlessly around me, its emptiness vast and consuming. My task had once seemed simple. I was here to bring the word of God to a people I had imagined as lost souls waiting to be saved. I had come with conviction, a Bible in my hand, and a purpose set in stone. But now, in this moment, I had nothing but my sweat-soaked robes, the taste of dirt in my mouth, and a sharp, cutting bitterness in my heart. When I'd first arrived in their village, they hadn't welcomed me as I had expected. There had been no gatherings, no welcoming fires, no eager faces ready to hear of the salvation I brought. Instead, they watched me with quiet, dark eyes, like embers in a fire, filled with curiosity and something I couldn't place at the time. I remember now, standing here alone in the sand, how those eyes watched as I spoke of a God who would deliver them from suffering, of a heaven above their heads waiting if they would only believe. But I hadn't seen the flicker of disbelief in those eyes, the way they weighed my words, almost amused. In the nights that followed, I was treated more as an animal than a guest. They brought me into a simple tent, bound my hands, and left me there. For days I sat, watched, and waited, listening to the sounds of their village, the laughter of children, the steady rhythm of drums, the way their voices rose and fell like the shifting of sand dunes. No one came to me. No one asked to hear the words of my God. One night they took me. Rough hands pulled me from my tent, my wrists still bound, my skin raw from the ropes. They led me out under the open sky, the cold desert air striking me like 1,000 needles. I remember the sharp, dry taste of the night wind, the way it whipped around us, how the moon was so bright it turned the sand silver. They brought me to a place I'd never seen before, a shallow depression in the sand surrounded by twisted, gnarled trees that seemed to claw at the sky. There, I was made to kneel, and a man older than I could have imagined, his face lined and his eyes like dark wells, spoke to me in a voice that cut through the night like a blade. He told me of the land, of their ancestors, of gods older than anything I had known. I listened as he spoke of spirits that moved through the wind, that stirred the sand, that were part of every rock and tree in this desolate place. I'd felt a spark of anger then. Who were they to speak of gods to me? I, who had been chosen, who had given my life to the only true God. And yet, as I knelt there, forced to listen, I could feel something shift within me, something cold and uncertain creeping up from the depths of my mind. Their gods did not promise salvation. Their gods did not threaten damnation. Their gods simply were. As the days turned into weeks, they forced me into labor, my hands calloused and cracked from the rough ropes, my back aching as I lifted heavy baskets of sand, carrying them from one end of the village to another. The wind never ceased, sweeping through with a shrill whistle that wore away at my patience and my pride. I came to know the desert in a way I had never wanted. The heat burned through my clothes by day, the cold bit deep into my bones by night, and all the while they watched me, those dark, quiet eyes, as if waiting for something to crack inside of me. I prayed at first. In those early days, I prayed fiercely, with a passion born of desperation. I begged for deliverance, for a sign, for anything to remind me that God was watching, that he hadn't abandoned me in this God-forsaken place. But there was only silence, stretching out as vast as the desert itself. Eventually I stopped praying. The words felt empty, the promises I had once believed in hollow. The memories of hymns and verses faded, replaced by the relentless sun, the wind, and the weight of sand slipping between my fingers. I began to feel as if I were sinking into this desert, my mind breaking down, grain by grain, like the very sand I moved each day. The tribe's beliefs, once so foreign and strange, began to creep into my thoughts. I'd overheard the old man speaking of the spirit of the desert, how it was both merciless and giving, taking life only to give it back in another form. They saw the desert not as a punishment, but as a sacred trial, a place where strength and faith were tested, where the spirits watched in silent judgment. One night, lying beneath the vast expanse of stars, I felt that silence in my soul, a silence that seemed to match the silence of the desert. For the first time, I did not curse it or beg it to end. I simply listened. I lay there, staring up at a sky wider and emptier than I had ever known, feeling myself become part of that emptiness. I felt the wind swirl over me, cold and sharp, filling the spaces where my faith had once been. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one day I realized I no longer thought of God. I no longer felt the need to pray, to plead, to question why this suffering had been inflicted upon me. Instead, I accepted it, the way the tribe accepted the shifting sands, the way they accepted life and death as two parts of the same whole. I began to see their gods in the world around me, the faint murmur of voices in the wind, the way the sands moved as if by unseen hands, the quiet wisdom in the eyes of the old man who watched me, as if he had seen this transformation coming from the start. And when I stood there, free but bound to this desert in a way I could never escape, I knew I had been remade. The thought crept in slowly, like the first glimmers of dawn crawling over the horizon, silent and inevitable. It arrived on a night when the wind was still, and the moon cast a pale, ghostly light across the desert, turning every shadow into something darker, something deeper. I lay in my tent, listening to the soft murmur of voices outside, their words blending with the soft rustling of sand that slipped over rocks, settling into cracks and crevices like secrets. I imagined, suddenly and vividly, another man, a missionary, as I had once been, filled with conviction and faith, arriving in the village. A man who would stand tall, his voice carrying the same surety and strength I had once possessed. He would come with his book, his doctrines, his vision of a God who demanded obedience, a heaven that could only be reached by the narrow path he had set. And I felt a rage rise within me, raw and deep, fierce as the desert's heat at midday. It clawed its way up from the depths of my chest, filling me with an anger so fierce it felt like it could tear through my skin. How dare he come here? How dare anyone threaten this world, the one I had learned to survive, the one I had been remade in, that had swallowed me whole and spit me out as something different, something harder, something wiser. I imagined his face, the smug confidence in his eyes, the way his lips would form around familiar verses, words that had once been mine, but now felt like poison. He would come here, seeking to conquer this place, to strip it of its spirit, its gods, to flatten its vastness into something small and sterile. I knew with a dark certainty that I would not allow that. The thought of taking his life did not disgust me. In fact, it thrilled me, a cold shiver of satisfaction spreading through my veins. The desert had taken me and broken me, had reshaped my soul with its sand and silence, and in that reshaping, it had hardened something inside me, something that saw this land, this village, these people as my own. I would not see them desecrated by another's empty promises, by doctrines that spoke of salvation while casting shadows of damnation over the lives here. Yes, I would kill him. The certainty of it settled over me, as calm and inevitable as the night itself. I could feel the roughness of the sand in my hands, imagine the weight of a stone or the edge of a blade. He would fall, and his body would be buried beneath the desert sands, lost to the vastness, consumed by the land he sought to change. His God, his words, would vanish into silence, as irrelevant as a whisper lost to the wind. I felt my lips curl into a grim smile. The gods of this desert had claimed me, bound me to them with chains of heat and hunger and emptiness. They had shown me the truth of survival, of life and death in its purest form. And now I would protect this place as fiercely as they had claimed me. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, I felt complete, not with hope or salvation or the promises of a heaven above, but with the cold certainty that I belonged to the desert now, and it to me, and I would do whatever was necessary to keep it whole, to protect it from the faith I had once held, the faith I now saw as weak and brittle as dry, cracking bones. When the next man came, and I knew he would, I would be waiting,